foreigner buy real estate in Nairobi or in Kenya?
There are just certain restrictions, such as having restrictions on owning agricultural property.
How about diplomats?
If you go to the KRA website, there are a lot of frequently asked questions and answers.
Welcome back to Nairobi Insights, where we unravel the mysteries of Kenya's real estate landscape. Today, we are diving deep into a topic that has sparked a lot of curiosity among our viewers: acquiring a KRA PIN as a foreigner. We've received numerous questions on this, so we've brought in an expert to shed some light. I'm your host, Koch, and joining us today is the last year's Philip Onyango, a commercial law expert with a penchant of unraveling legal complexities. Again, thank you so much for sharing your questions with us, and we are going to tackle them today. Welcome, Philip. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and you look so sharp.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you. I don't know what to say after that compliment. I'd be speechless. Yeah. Thank you, and I think you introduced me very well. My name is Philip Onyango. I am an advocate practicing in Nairobi. I am the managing partner of PI Onyango and Company. So we provide legal services. We also provide governance, sort of governance assistance, because I sit as a company secretary on various boards, and I'm also a practicing insolvency practitioner. So you have spoken that I do a lot of commercial law, but we are also a fully fledged firm, very boutique based in Nairobi, and we also undertake transactions in Kenya and Uganda. So thank you for having me.
You're most welcome, and you've of course explained so much about what you do. Thank you so much. And could you please tell us who a commercial law expert is?
Yeah, it's you find that law is quite wide. You don't have it's very rare for one person to do everything. So commercial law is really about business transactions and the law behind business transactions. So assuming about, let's say, setting up a business, what does that entail? What's the licensing behind that? It can also extend towards acquiring property, although that's also real estate law, but that's still a subset of commercial law. So it's a very wide practice, and it's anything that does not involve dispute resolution, for example, going to courts. So that's on the other side of the law that enables business actually continue and work within the environment. Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. It's good to know that. And we have so many questions from our audience, our viewers, and the most common one is, what is KRA PIN? Because we get to talk to people who are living abroad, and also foreigners who are interested in buying properties in Kenya or Nairobi. So that is one question. And then next is, can a foreigner buy real estate in Nairobi or in Kenya?
Okay. So even by the name KRA PIN, KRA meaning Kenya Revenue Authority, PIN is personal identification number. So a PIN is actually a unique identifier of a registered taxpayer. So what that means that if you're a registered taxpayer, you're given a unique number that identifies you in transactions entailing tax matters. So it's pretty much how you'll be identified when you're doing transactions, paying for taxes or anything. So it's your personal number. A foreigner can actually own property within the country. There are just certain restrictions, such as having restrictions on owning agricultural property, and also in restrictions in terms of land tenure, where you can't own a lease beyond 99 years. You can own freehold title, for example, but there are no other restrictions in terms of a foreigner owning property within Kenya.
What is the process? How long does it take for a foreigner to get this KRA PIN?
Now, so it depends. Now, when you talk about a foreigner, a foreigner can be categorized into, you can put it in two broad categories. We're talking about a foreigner who is resident within the country. So if you have someone who is resident in the country, that means they sort of have a status, immigration status. You're either here by virtue of employment, you have a work permit, or maybe you're an investor. So if you're a foreigner who's resident in the country, you have your status, you're issued with something known as an alien identification card, an alien card. So your alien card is sort of like your Kenyan national ID that identifies you with your identification paper for operating, for being within the country. Now, when you're applying for a PIN and you're resident, it's much easier and faster because you're already vetted, you already have a status. In fact, you're earning income in the country. So when you're applying for your PIN, you'll simply produce, the main document should be your alien ID. That should be a national ID. Now, when you go on to someone who is a non-resident, someone who is abroad, then that's where you don't have residence within the country. Maybe you don't have an NLID, so that means you'll be using your passport. So in that, there are certain procedures that actually you'd have to follow and satisfy the tax authority that there's a certain purpose you're here. Maybe you're here to invest, but you're not resident in the country. And it might be a bit more hurdles, but it would advise those people to actually get some sort of assistance. Maybe get an accountant, get a lawyer to actually get you that PIN. Yeah. So the process in terms of timelines, again, it depends. So if you're a resident, if you're a resident in the country, it's much faster because you already have your LNID. It's a matter of going on the system, making an application, putting your LNID. Within, it can be immediate or a couple of business days, maybe 2 or 3 business days, and you get your PIN. On the other hand, if you're not resident, you'll get an acknowledgement slip and you'll visit maybe one of the KRA offices and provide proof of why you actually need to be issued with this PIN. So there's certain requirements that you'll have to satisfy if you're non-resident, which is something that we help people navigate.
What about Kenyans living abroad? They're living abroad and they're paying, of course, taxes in their resident country. So how about them when they want to buy?
What we advise them is that not to try and navigate this thing by themselves, because you don't want to apply for the wrong sort of obligation. You don't want to, by mistake, instead of putting income tax, you add a VAT obligation or pay as you earn obligation. And all those obligations have their own sort of nuances and requirements where you have to file monthly returns. So we always advise our clients, get someone to help you to navigate this process. And you alluded to the importance of having a PIN in property transactions. Our systems are now becoming very integrated, whereby you have an e-citizen system that encompasses everything. Very soon, you can't operate or you can't do any transaction or deal with the government without having a PIN or an ID or something. Yeah? So when you're acquiring property, and especially within Nairobi, we need something known as an Addisas account. And this enables you to undertake property transactions online. Now, a PIN also, you need a PIN because there are certain taxes that have to be paid during the acquisition of property. So for you to enable to log in and actually pay the required taxes, you need to have a PIN. So invariably, when you're undertaking a commercial property transaction, you need a PIN. And it will be a requirement even when you're presenting those documents for registration, when you're acquiring your property.
How about diplomats and foreigners who are working for multinational agencies? Do they go through the same process? They also need the KRA PIN. Maybe you can tell us about that?
So yes, again, if they need to transact in property transactions, yeah, they will need a PIN, and diplomats and some of these people, international organizations have special cards, maybe a diplomatic card or something that shows why they're in the country. So there's also a process in terms of specifically tailored made for them on how they would be able to apply for a PIN. They produce maybe their passport with an endorsement saying that they're here on a diplomatic purpose. They also produce their diplomatic card, and maybe they go online and make an application and get an acknowledgement letter. There are also certain letters they might get from the foreign ministry just to confirm the status here. And then as you present that to the tax authorities, they'll be able to review and process that. So again, in terms of timelines, it's not as straightforward as a Kenyan, because as a Kenyan, you just apply online, put your ID, it will be processed almost immediately or within a day or two. For them, there's an extra step of verification. Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't take too long, maybe just a couple of business days after they've received all the documentation they need.
Now let's talk about the taxes. What are the taxes that our foreigners need to be aware of when they're buying properties in Kenya?
I do this. I would split it between maybe transactional taxes and non-transactional taxes. Why do I say this? The non-transactional taxes are the things that you pay without doing any step if you're not doing any commercial transaction, right? So this is like if you buy a property and it's leasehold, for example, there's an annual rent payable to the government. It might not be a tax, but it's a rent. It's a sort of revenue generating way for the government to make its money, right? So there's annual rent that might be payable on that lease. Where within a specific county, for example, Nairobi County, you'll have land rates, which you have to pay annually. So those are the main things that you'd be looking at if you don't do anything on the land. Now, when I go to the transactional taxes, let's look from the point of acquisition of the property. When you are acquiring the property, you'll have to pay stamp duty upon transfer of the property from the seller to the buyer. So within Nairobi, the stamp duty rate is 4%. If you're out of Nairobi or in other non-municipalities, non-urban areas, or areas which have not been designated as a municipality, you'll be paying stamp duty at a rate of 2%. Now, if, for example, you were to sell that property, and you made like a gain, there's something called capital gains tax. So currently we have a capital gains tax rate of 15%, which is tax imposed on the gain when you dispose a property. So the gain there's a way you calculate the gain. It's like how much did you buy the property for, what additions did you put on it, did you have legal fees and everything, and then whatever gain you made on top of that, there'll be a 15% tax imposed on that. And that is borne by the seller. Stamp duty is typically borne by the acquirer when you acquire the property, because you're acquiring an interest in that property. Another sort of transactional tax I'll speak about is if you get a bank loan, I need to charge the property. Maybe that was during the acquisition, or maybe later you use the property to finance something else. Now you typically have to pay stamp duty on the security document that is used to secure the loan against the bank loan, right? So that there'll be stamp duty rate of 0.1% of the amount being charged on that property against that loan to secure that loan. Again, when you're discharging that property, there's also stamp duty on the discharge of the property. If you are an individual and you're residing in the country and you're resident in Kenya, you can be able to, you can take advantage of what is called as a residential rental income tax, whereby there's a final tax at the rate of 7.5% of the gross rent that you receive, provided that the annual rent does not exceed 15 million in a year. So how does that help you? That just means that you have a flat rate of 7.5% on the gross rent. Gross means if there's an actual rent or if there's service charge or whatever charges, that whole gross amount will be subject to 7.5% if you're resident in the country. Resident meaning you're in the country, or you're a company registered in Kenya. Now, if I go on the other hand and you have like a commercial property, you bought a property for letting, or you have shops, for example. Now that rent will be subject to VAT at the rate of 16%. So those are some of the tax nuances you have to think about, and we can't mention about everything. We can't mention everything that's entailed, but that's something you'll be looking at as a general summation. Yeah.
Are there any tax exemptions available for foreigners?
There's not quite an exemption for foreigners. Okay. We have this principle of can you equitably ensure that everyone pays their fair share of taxes. But maybe at the top of my mind, I would think about if maybe you bought property or you set up business in these special economic zones or export processing zones. But apart from that, there's not really much of an exemption or something to take advantage of, whether you're Kenyan or you're a foreigner trying to buy property. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Like
I from a general look of things, yes.
On Monday, spoke to not a foreigner from East Africa, and that was the first question that you were asking. Would we get an exemption as we are also still in East Africa? Do we have an exemption?
Maybe I'll address what would be what would be their obligations henceforth upon acquiring that PIN. So if they just bought property and they're not making any income from it, and it's just and there's no other income that's derived from this country or they're generating in this country, you're able to just file your nil returns per year, right? But if you're undertaking maybe a business activity, or you're receiving rent, whether residential or commercial, then you'll have to pay your taxes on that. So that's pretty much the distinction between what obligations they would have, and then also if they have maybe added obligations on their PIN registration, assuming you have a VAT obligation, or you have a pay-as-you-earn if you have employees maybe at your property managing it, and you've actually put an obligation for the payment of the same. You'll have to do your monthly returns and monthly payments. So it depends, depending on the obligation and the sort of income you're generating and where that income is being generated from. If it's within Kenya and it's accrued within Kenya, you'll have to pay your taxes on that income.
Okay. Thank you so much, Philip. And to our viewers, it is important to take a note that once you have your KRA PIN, it's important to stay compliant with Kenya's tax laws, especially if you are earning income here in Kenya.
If you go to the KRA website, there are a lot of frequently asked questions and answers on the website that can also guide you on some of the requirements. And you can pretty much understand what you need when you're trying to get some of these registrations and also for the ongoing compliance. But all in all, even as you do that and you're trying to ensure that you're compliant, it's always advisable. Get an accountant, get a bookmaker, even get a lawyer or someone else to guide you and to take advantage of some of these provisions in our tax laws. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Philip, and to our audience. Now you know that if you're ready and you are looking for these services, we have Philip, who is our referral partner, and their details are shared below, so you can feel free to reach out to them. So remember, if you have any other questions, other further questions or topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out. Until next time, this is Nairobi Insights signing off. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay inspired.